As Seventh-day Adventists, we follow in the footsteps of the great reformers of the past, whereby the Word of God alone and the faith of God alone, through the grace which He freely offers to us through the atoning blood of Jesus, these are the foundations of our doctrine. I want to have a look at a few difficult subjects this morning. When we talk about the three angels' messages, obviously we have the first angel's message, which proclaims the everlasting gospel that needs to be preached to the world. But the second angel's message refers to Babylon. It says Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And that's not always an easy message to give. And then there's the third angel's message, which warns us against the consequences of not having the seal of God when it comes to claim what's rightfully his. But I want to say that whatever we say here in church, especially this church, we say out of love, because the gospel message is just that, it's one of love. Sometimes God's truth can be divisive, and sometimes certainly uncomfortable, because the Word of God separates. It causes us to come out and be separate. The problem that often lies in understanding just what we need to separate ourselves from. But at the same time, we know that we know better than anyone else, and we don't profess to be. But we do believe and trust in the Word of God, simply because it's the only reliable source of truth. And Hebrews chapter 4 verse 12 tells us something important. It says, for the Word of God is quick and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit. So it tells us that the Word of God it is divisive, and it is going to separate if we keep to God's Word. I also just wanted to have quick. Sorry, I've got that many verses. I'll probably read them myself if that's okay. But I will obviously give you the references. In Luke chapter 4 verse 4, it says Jesus speaking. Jesus answered, "It is written that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word of God." Some of the new versions say something a bit different. That's the King James Version. I don't want to get into a battle of the Bibles this morning, but if anyone's reading in the New International Version, Luke 4 verse 4, it says, Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone." So it leaves something out. It leaves the last part of the verse out, which says, "But by every word of God." So it just struck me that supposing someone comes to the Bible for the first time, they're new, they don't know any doctrine. They don't know God. And they pick up the New International Version and open the Bible at Luke 4:4, and it says, "Man shall not live on bread alone." Then, how do they live? Does that give us any instruction on how they should live? Should they be relying on the works of their own hands? But if we read in the King James Version, it makes much more sense. And some people may not like me saying this, but I'll say it anyway, that maybe they think this is a mistake in the New International Version. But if that's so, then there are 695 similar mistakes in the New International Version, which alter the original textus receptus, the received text. And what's even more surprising is the New King James Version has 1,200 changes from the original text. But it's not until we study the two gentlemen that make the revisions that we realise why they did what they did. Westcott and Hort, and what they did is shocking actually. They said, we'll change a little bit here and we'll change a little bit there. And no one will ever know that what you understand when you look at all the changes as a whole will be our doctrine and not theirs. Now, supposedly these two people were Protestants, but they actually believed in the theology of Origen, that Jesus Christ was not the gate which led to God. They believed something quite different. And I'd urge everyone to look into this for themselves and check these alterations out. These differences between the King James Version and the new versions are quite stark. It's frightening, really. Revelation 22, verses 18 and 19 say, "For I testify unto every man that heareth the words of the prophecy of this book. If any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. And if any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book." So this is a stark warning of what God will do with anyone that messes with his word. Don't mess with the word of God. As I was preparing this today, I was pondering over this incredible battle that we're all a part of. This spiritual battle that is taking place for every living soul on this earth. And I suppose if you asked any general of any army about preparing for battle, I'm sure that they'd all tell you the same thing. I can't give you the full statement because there's a rude word in it, but it says proper planning prevents poor performance, or failure to prepare to fail. So yes, we need to be fit to fight, physically and mentally. Yes, we need to be equipped to defend ourselves. Yes, we need to be armed when we face the enemy. But I'm sure that they'll all tell you that just as importantly to all of these things, that we need to know our enemy. And an army general would refer to that as intelligence, which is information about the enemy. What their strengths and weaknesses are, how they operate, where they're located, what tactics they use. You can't fight an enemy that you can't identify as an enemy. So your preparation can be as watertight as possible. But if you don't know your enemy, the chances are you're preparing to fail. Is this something that we should all be considering in our own battle plans? Maybe so. Personally, I'd say that it's essential, especially because the chief weapon that this enemy of ours uses is deception. So yes, we need to put on the full armour of God. However, you only need to look at billions of people throughout the world that are all truly believing that they've already won the battle through being well armed, when in actual fact they've been deceived and lied to by an enemy that they can't even identify because they've failed to prepare adequately. I'd like to have a look at Revelation 17, which gives us a description of this enemy that we're up against. Revelation 17, I'm just going to look at the first few verses, 1 to 6. And Revelation 17 describes to us the judgment of the great whore that sitteth on many waters, as it says in verse 1. And we know from Bible prophecy that a woman is a church. And we can read about that in Jeremiah chapter 6 verse 2. We won't read that now, but that gives you the description of what a woman is in Bible prophecy. And Christ is the husband who is coming back to his bride, the church. And we know that waters represent nations, peoples and tongues. So verse 1 says, and there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying, come hither, and I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth on many waters. So this is strong language. A woman or a church, and in this case we're dealing with an unfaithful woman, unfaithful to God anyway, and she sits on many nations, so she's leading, she's in charge of many nations. And it goes on to say, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. So the kings of the earth have had a relationship with this church, contrary to what God would have wanted them to have. And the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. The verse goes on. So what does this mean? This means that if the wine represents her teachings and her doctrines, these are apostate doctrines that have confused the minds of these people. These nations have become intoxicated by her teachings, but also they're in awe of what she claims. So far then, we see that there's this apostate church that's in control of everything, and the kings have had these relationships with this apostate church, contrary to God's law and God's word, and they've all been absorbed by her doctrines of unfaithfulness and contradiction to those of the Bible. If we carry on reading, it says, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-coloured beast, full of names of blasphemy. And blasphemy, as we know, as the Bible tells us, is claiming to have the authority of God. It's claiming to sit in the place of God, having his power. That's blasphemy. And it's also claiming to be able to forgive sins, which is very interesting. And the Bible says that this beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. And these, later on, we won't actually read this verse, but in verse 9 it says that these 7 heads are 7 mountains on which this apostate church sits. So here's another clue as to who this woman represents. But when we look at the 4 beasts that are spoke about in Daniel chapter 7, we can find that these 7 heads, all these seven heads represent, because we have the first beast is the Lion of Babylon, which has 1 head. The bear of Medo-Persia has 1 head. The leopard representing Greece has 4 heads, so that's 6. And then we have this final beast, this 4th and dreadful, exceedingly strong beast. This has 1. So that's 7 heads that we're talking about here. These are the 7 heads. So they represent the 7 kingdoms that have taken place. And we know that this final power, this final beast, is an amalgamation of all these powers which have come together and are embodied in this final representation of this final beast. And it says that the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet. The colours purple and red are specific to this church system, which incidentally are the colours used by the bishops and cardinals, which is interesting. It may be coincidental, but I don't know. The verse goes on, and this woman is decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. But we know that this church system has wealth beyond all belief. It's not until that you visit the Vatican and see for yourself that the treasures that have been collected together, they will actually blow your mind. And no one can explain the opulence of this system. You have to witness it for yourself to believe it. It's unbelievable. And this woman has a golden cup in her hand. The verse says, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And I don't know if you can see clearly from that image, but this statue has a golden cup in her hand. This is the church of the Jesuits, the founding Jesuit Ignatius Loyola is buried. Thank you, Joseph. Is buried in a tomb just below this statue. And no other church dare use this imagery that's in Chiesa del Gesù. As I say, this is the headquarters of the Jesuit church. And if anyone who doesn't know, the Jesuits were founded for one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to obliterate Protestantism. As the Reformation took off, the Jesuits were suddenly came to fruition, if you like. And it's still their task to eliminate Protestantism today. If we carry on reading in Revelation 17, it says, and upon her head was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. So a mystery gives us a clue that there's something concealed. And we know that the pagan mysteries of antiquity, the pagan religions, which we're going to have a look at shortly, they're referred to as the mystery schools of religion, or the sacred mysteries, or simply mysteries. Mysterious because they were characterized by the secrets of their initiations, by their systems and their practices. And they were only made available to certain people that were initiated into this system. So you had to be someone special to get into this club. But we know what Jesus said in John chapter 18 verse 20. He said, "I spake openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whither the Jews always resort, and in secret I have said nothing." So this pagan mystery system uses lots of images, it uses lots of signs, and it uses lots of symbols, whereby they create this sense of mystery, because it's special according to them. But in actual fact, Jesus said nothing in secret. I just want to move sort of away from that now, if we could, from Revelation 17. If we can have a look at 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 to 18. It says, "Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. As God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty." So, over the last few weeks we've studied in our Sabbath school lessons about what can go wrong when we lose our close connection through faithfulness or lack of it with God. We've seen how the unfaithfulness of the people in returning their tithes led to the dysfunction of the whole temple system, and consequently the worship of God diminished. We also studied how the people strayed from faithful Sabbath keeping, and in doing so they not only lost their connection with God, they lost this physical and spiritual benefit that it offered them. And we also heard what happened when they started to intermarry with non-Israelites. That's when the pagan influences and differences in language again resulted in people losing touch with the Word of God. So the Israelites were influenced by the world and those around them, just as easily as we can be that way today. What we know from history is that sun worship was the oldest practice of pagan idolatry, and it can be traced back to just about every single culture in the pre-Christian world, starting with the Babylonians, followed by the Assyrians and the Egyptians. In Romans chapter 1, verses 21 to 24, it reads, "Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and to four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through lusts of their own hearts." Now the only culture that didn't worship the sun at that time were the children of Israel. And there was one thing that identified them as being separate from all the other nations, and it stopped them sinking into pagan idolatry. And that we can find in Exodus chapter 31, verses 15 to 17. It says, 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath, he shall surely be put to death. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. So the Israelites' relationship with and obedience to God, and especially the Sabbath, is what made them different to all these other cultures on earth. And yes, we're all born with a natural instinct for what is morally right or wrong. But can sin exist without a standard by which it can be identified as sin? Can a court convict without a law being broken? 1 John chapter 3 verse 4 says, whosoever committeth sin transgresseth the law also, for sin is the transgression of the law. We all know that verse, it's a well-known verse. So the law identifies sin. But people say, oh, the law was for the Jews, it was done away with at the cross. Not according to Jesus. In Matthew chapter 5, 17 to 18, which was our scripture reading, Jesus says, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. And the book of Revelation tells us that just before the end of time on this earth as we know it, God will have a faithful people. It tells us that there will be some identifying marks of these people. They will have God's seal. It says they will have the mark of God's seal. And that this seal comprises of just two things. We all know what they are. Yeah? Hopefully. The first one, they will keep the commandments of God. And secondly, they will have the faith of Jesus. But were the Israelites always faithful to God? Definitely not. And each time they turned away from God, which direction did they turn to? They turned to the east. They were influenced by what was going on around them. It was always the worship of the sun that replaced their worship for God. And if we read in Ezekiel chapter 4 verses 14 to 16, this says, then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was to the north. And behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Then said he unto me, hast thou seen this, O son of man? Turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations than these. And so he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east. And they worshipped the sun toward the east. Well, just in this, this is taken from it's an ancient Babylon carving, and it represents what was happening at that time. And you can see, just take a special note of that cross that's around his neck there, which is it's a sign of sun worship. This verse that we've just, the verses we've just read, they speak about Tammuz. So who was Tammuz? Well, it depended which culture you originated from as to what was believed. And also what the names of these deities were. So one story says that Tammuz was the illegitimate son of Semiramis, who was dubbed by the pagans as the Queen of Heaven. She was a deity that was worshipped. She was idolised and still is today. It's interesting also to note that Roman Catholicism has many different names for Mary, and Queen of Heaven is one of them. Tammuz was also the son of Nimrod, who was the great-grandson of Noah. And the story goes that Tammuz managed to kill his mother just in the nick of time, just before she was to have had him killed, and that was supposed to have been the same way that she had had his father Nimrod killed. I'm not going to go into that story because it's too gruesome, but if you want to read about that, you can find out something very interesting. But most importantly, what the events of all these stories, choose which culture it came from. The events of these stories, they laid the groundwork, if you like, for all the pagan religious systems of antiquity that surrounded this small pocket of God's commandment-keeping people, as well as all those that are still in existence today. This mother, father, child system of worship can be found in just about every false religious system being practiced today. I'd just like you to look at that symbol around the Pope's neck there, and if it looks familiar to what we've just seen, the cross that we've just seen on that stone statue. And incidentally, Tammuz was born on the 25th of December. That's an interesting date for you. What we also know is that the pagans, as they still do, they set aside the 25th of December as the birthday of the solar man. The sun is said to die at the winter solstice on the shortest day of the year, the 21st of December. And then he's reborn on the 25th. So this is the winter solstice period, and it's celebrated as the rebirth of the Roman sun god Mithra. And Mithra is the deity of the Roman Mithraic religion. The Emperor Constantine was the one responsible for merging Christianity with paganism in 320 something. And in so doing, they superimposed the so-called Christian festival onto a pagan one, and they metamorphized Jesus Christ into a solar deity. Basically, he became the sun god. I would say that the greatest ally of deception is time. If you can manage to deceive a whole generation into believing a lie, the ones that follow on afterwards will automatically accept what they're being told as the truth without even questioning. And there's a name for this, it's simply called tradition. And perhaps the biggest deception of all time is through the course of tradition, it has to be the alleged transference of Sunday sacredness from the seventh-day Sabbath in direct contradiction of God's fourth commandment to keep it holy. We've spoke about before about what Ellen White wrote all those years ago about the two great errors that would be in place just before Jesus returned. She spoke of the immortality of the soul and Sunday sacredness. By these two things, Satan will bring the people under his deceptions, while the former lays the foundation for spiritualism, the latter creates a bond of sympathy with Rome. Daniel chapter 7, if we can go back to that we mentioned earlier, that also tells us of the vision of these four beast powers, which were four kings or four kingdoms, and particularly this fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others. It was exceedingly dreadful. It had teeth of iron and nails of brass, which devoured, broke in pieces and stamped the residues of its feet. And power was given to it to make war with the saints and to prevail against them. It would devour the whole earth, tread it down and break it into pieces. And verse 25 of Daniel 7 says, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws." So, as this fourth beast power had the audacity to change God's times and his laws, there are literally dozens and dozens of quotes from popes, bishops, cardinals, Catholic commentators, Catholic documents, etc., that tell us that the change of the day of worship from Saturday to Sunday was the mark of the authority of the Church's ecclesiastical power over and above the Word of God. And why can they do this? Because they say that the Church is infallible. Their power cannot be questioned. It's above and beyond the power of God. And if we look in their converts' catechism, it gives us some interesting information. This is a document that they use to indoctrinate new members into the Church. And it has a question and answer section. And it's up there if you want to read. It says, question, which is the Sabbath day? Bear in mind, this is Catholic doctrine. This is the Catholic Church speaking. Saturday is the Sabbath day. Question, why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? Answer, we observe Sunday instead of Saturday because the Catholic Church in the Council of Laodicea transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. So this isn't something that's hidden. In fact, they use it to boast about the power that they have that they've usurped, if you like, the Word of God. I also want to give you just a couple of quotes from a couple of interesting sources. The first is from a man, he wasn't only a bishop in the United States, but he was also a towering figure in United States politics. Does that ring any bells when we talk about church and state? This man had the ears of the presidents of his time, particularly Theodore Roosevelt. In his apologetics, The Faith of Our Fathers, Cardinal James Gibbons made the following statement on the subject of the Mithraic memorial of Sunday. Quote, "Is not every Christian obliged to sanctify Sunday and to abstain from servile work? Is not the observance of this law among the most prominent of our sacred duties? But you may read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and you will not find a single line authorizing the sanctification of Sunday. The scriptures enforce the religious observance of Saturday, a day which we never sanctify." Unquote. Is that an affront to God, or is that an affront to God? Is this Garden of Eden talk? Is this power usurping God's word? And the second quote is from the Catholic Immaculate Heart Mary online website. It says, quote, "Most Christians assume that Sunday is the biblically approved day of worship. The Catholic Church protests that it transferred Christian worship from the biblical Sabbath, Saturday, to Sunday. If Protestantism wants to base its teachings only on the Bible, it should worship on Saturday." Unquote. So it can't be much clearer than that. Worship God as he asked on the Sabbath, or worship on Sunday because the church said so. But the Catholic Church also did something very interesting when it came to changing God's law, the Ten Commandments. You see, the Bible, their Bible, if you like, is written just as we know it, just as it was written on 2 tablets of stone with the finger of God. That's how it appears in the Bible. But they don't teach from the Bible. They teach from the Catechism. And the Catechism is ordained by the Church, and therefore it usurps God's word because it's infallible. So, as we know, God's commandments were written on two tablets. One was for God, and we see on the left-hand side there, it doesn't actually show the commandments on the two tablets. But we know that the first tablet contained the first 4 commandments, which was our relationship to God. And the following 6, starting at number 5, was on the second tablet, which is our relationship to our fellow man. But they did something interesting when they dared to alter God's word. The second commandment, "You shall not make for yourself any idol," of course they had to get rid of, because this was contrary to what they did and what they believed. These people worshipped idols. So they got rid of the second commandment. As you can see on the right-hand table there, that's as it appears in the Catholic Catechism. So they removed number 2, and as you can see, the blasphemy, "You shall not take the Lord's name in vain," number 3, actually then becomes number 2 in the Catechism. Remember the Sabbath day, the 4th commandment moves up to number 3. But the most interesting thing of all is the following commandment, which is number 5, "to honour your father and mother." That moves up to number 4. So now what do you have? You have honour your father and mother on the God's side. It becomes number 4, so it's on God's tablet, if you like. It's our relationship to God. Yeah? my point is that you now have the mother as well as the father as number 4. So that's our relationship. That should be our sole relationship to God. But you have the mother appearing on that tablet now, which is quite significant if you know how they worship. So if we think about what we spoke earlier about the pagan mother, father, child form of worship, and also very importantly they believe in the Trinity. But which Trinity do they believe in? I think that's pretty obvious now that we know when we look at the mother, father, child system of worship. The Trinity, and we need to be careful when we use the word Trinity, because Trinity means something very different in Catholicism. The Bible actually uses the word Godhead. You can't find the word Trinity in the Bible. And I'd also just like to have a quick look here at Matthew 24 verse 36. Has anyone got, can anyone read King James or King James version of Matthew 24, 36, please?
Matthew 46.
36.
Oh,
Matthew 24, 36.
It says, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only.
So it says, read that again, Joseph, sorry, please.
Yeah.
Just read it slowly.
24, verse 36.
Yeah, it's right one. I just want us to get just read it a bit slowly. Yeah.
But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only.
So only the Father knows. This is Jesus is talking about the end, when the end will come. It's only the Father that knows. If we can, has anyone got a New International Version?
yeah.
Could you just read that, what that says, please?
What verse is it?
36.
36.
24, 26.
Matthew 24, 36.
Says, but about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father.
So it mentions here the Son.
Mm.
Because what these two people that we spoke about earlier that altered, that made the revisions, they believed that Jesus wasn't God. So they believed he was a created being. So here they mention the Son, which isn't mentioned in the original, it's not mentioned in the original version. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm not explaining very well. But this is just one of the alterations that they make to try and get their doctrine over. They do actually believe in the Trinity, as I say, but it's not the Father, Son and Holy Spirit that we know. So we've looked at history and we've looked at some things that are going on in the world around us. And some might call this a conspiracy, and we all know what conspiracy theories are. But what we've also done is we've also looked at the Bible and tied everything up with the Bible. So people can't say that this is conspiracy. I'd say this is fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 19 says, we have a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well that ye take heed, as unto a light that shineth in a dark place, until the day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts. But the Bible also warns us in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1. It says, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils." So let us never fall for the lies of Satan. Let us fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come.
Amen.
May God help us to give our hearts to Jesus every minute of every day, because the hour of his judgment is soon to come to a close. Amen.
Amen.